We're in lesson 12 of this man by the name of Gideon. In our last lesson, Gideon had prepared his men for battle, and he had issued several pieces of equipment to them. Does anybody remember the things that were issued? Okay, a trumpet, a pitcher, okay, some kind of an earthen pitcher, and what else? A torch, okay, and a torch. So their hands were full of unconventional fighting equipment, wouldn't you say? I mean, I don't know if I were going into battle whether I'd want to take those, concealed carry for pitchers. I don't know if that would be too handy or not, but that's what he had issued them, and we can almost see after he's given those men those things, given them the instructions, when I do this, you follow me in battle, right? And now they're all begin to be dispersed into their place. How many of them? 300. Woo, big army, isn't it? Huge army. Notice point D in the introduction. Two of the groups were waiting and watching for Gideon's call to battle, because one group would have been with whom? With Gideon. Okay? Folks, when it's time for battle, the hearts of men are racing, are they not? You know, just as soon as the first trumpet sounds, guess what? This is about to get serious. Notice too, there is a steal, isn't there? Usually right before the battle. Gideon gives everybody plenty of time to make certain everybody's in their right place, right? So you get to your place, and guess what you do? You just sit and you just wait for the battle to come. Everyone is in a state of extremely high expectancy, aren't they? There's this anticipation for the battle. Now, what if you'd been a soldier under Gideon's command, right? And all you have as far as your initial contact with the enemy are your trumpet, your pitcher, and your torch. I might feel a little uneasy. You know it? There might be more than just anticipation. There might even be just a little bit of what? Fear that's involved in the hearts of some of these individuals. But notice point number one, the raid against Midian. It finally what? It finally happens. Folks, if you stick with us long enough, two things will happen in Bible class. We'll get to it and we'll finish it. Okay? Now eventually, notice the charting of the time. So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came into the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle of the watch. And they had but newly set the watch. What is he talking about? A watch. Talking about a wristwatch? I didn't even know they had them back then. Okay, a century, a guard. Okay, yes. When night fell, there were posts that were taken. Folks, when the Jews initially formed their armies and formed their rules for battle and engagement and what all they wanted their troops to do, they only had 3 watches in the night. Okay? Let me ask, for a Jew, when does night begin? 6 o'clock. Okay? And night goes from 6 till what? Till 6. So you divide that 12-hour period into 3 sections, so they're what? 4 hours. 6 to 10, 10 to 2, 2 to 6. Now notice what the text says. Okay? The text says this. They came into the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch. What time is that? 10 o'clock at night. Okay? And very little time had passed, because the text goes on to say, and they had but newly set the watch. Okay? The men who were on that second shift had just started their shift when it's time for them to disperse for battle. There are several allusions to watches in the night in Scripture. And I gave you one, Psalm 63:6. When I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches. Okay, in the night watches. And you can read those other ones, just beautiful. When Rome overthrew the Jews and took the Jews captive, Rome had a different system of watches. Okay? Their watches were not 4 hours. Their watches were 3 hours. So they had 4 3-hour shifts, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, 12 to 3, and then 3 to 6. So in the New Testament, when we start reading about these different watches, well then it's a different time period at that particular time because the Jews have now adopted the Roman watches for their military. Okay, so here we are. The battle begins at the beginning of the middle of the second watch, the middle watch. That's about 10 o'clock at night. And notice some points there. The skies would be what? Dark. Is it always dark at 6 o'clock? No, but guess what, folks? It's always dark usually by 10 o'clock, isn't it? Okay. They have these night movies down on the beach. And the last one, guess what time it started? 9 o'clock. Kathleen and I almost didn't go. We were scared we'd go to sleep. Okay. You know, not 9 o'clock to start a movie. You know, you go now at 11 o'clock in the morning, don't you? If you go to the movies, especially if you're an old folk. The reason they put it at 9 is why? Yeah, that's when it gets dark, okay? So it's dark. Notice this. Most of the enemy soldiers would have been where? In their beds, okay? Getting rest, getting sleep, in case the army attacks when? Tomorrow. Notice that third point. And we talked about this last time, folks. Most wars during that time were fought always in daylight hours. Okay? There were rules for battle. Let me ask you, when you go back into history and you see different wars and different battles, do you ever see some crazy stuff go on? You know, the Revolutionary War, have you ever looked at that war? Okay? It's the craziest thing, isn't it? You know, the colonies, what was their background? Yeah, but they were British, were they not? And you have the British fighting against these colonies of British people. So what do? They fight like British people, don't they? You have one line of folks out here and another line of folks out here, and you get close enough to one another, and you just start shooting one another. Now that is the smartest thing I've ever seen in my life. You know, here I am, shoot me. Whoever can load their gun fast enough is the one who wins, you know. In those cases, I want Forrest Gump on my side, okay? If you remember his fixing that gun. But they just didn't fight in the night, okay? It was fought in the daytime. You could see well. So this night battle is something that's pretty foreign to this particular time period. Notice also the fourth point there. Thus this raid upon the nation of Midian would have been a what? Complete surprise, folks. That leads to the clamor created by Israel. And they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers and held the lamps in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. And they cried, the sword of the Lord. And of who? Gideon. We don't even have 100 people here today. Okay? But let's all just take a minute and let's all one time do this. Let's all cry out, the sword of the Lord. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. The sword of the Lord. Now, just about make that 4 times the number of people. Okay? And you just keep screaming that. That's after what? That's after blowing trumpets. That's after breaking pitchers. Everybody just screaming out, the sword of the Lord, the sword of Gideon, the sword of the Lord, the sword of Gideon. And guess what? These 300 people are what? All around the Midianites, aren't they? We said they could have possibly stationed themselves as far as 10, 12 football fields in length. 30, 40, 50, 60 feet apart per individual. And you start screaming and you start breaking those pitchers and you start blowing on those trumpets. What kind of trumpets were they? Ram's horns. Anybody go home and listen to the ram's horns when you got home? Nah, I didn't do that, preacher. Okay. Go home, listen to the ram's horns, folks. Those shofars are loud, loud trumpets. And they would drive the enemy crazy. Okay? The silence was broken by 3 sounds. The trumpet blasts, 300 of them. The breaking of earthen pitchers, 300 of them. The shouts of 300 men crying from all directions, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. What are the enemy doing? They're sleeping, right? So the very moment you start hearing this battle go on, what do? Folks, you wake up, don't you? Okay? And you may not even at first grab your clothes. The first thing you may do is run over to the tent and do what? Look outside to see what's going on. And guess what you see? Torches, don't you? And folks, if you flicker a torch enough and you wave a torch enough, can it look like more than one person? Yes. Okay, especially if you have trees and other things in the way. You see a torch here, he runs over and then there's a torch. Well, I thought he was over here. And what do you think in your mind? If there's torches, there's usually more than one person with a torch. So if you see 300 torches and you think, well, there could be 20 people with one torch. Uh-oh, now we've got a pretty big group of people that have surrounded us, right? So now what do I have to do? I got to get dressed. Don't any of you tried to ever get dressed fast? I've seen some of you here. Okay, you woke up late, coming to church, didn't want to be late, You know how that is, don't you? But can you imagine trying to get dressed? And you're not just getting outer clothes on. What else do you want to get on? Yeah, I want to get my armor on, right? I want to make certain I get my sword, my spear, whatever else that I'm equipped with in order to fight this battle. Does that take time? Folks, all that takes time, right? And guess what else I don't want to do? Die. I don't want to die, do I? Here's this army, an attack. I don't know what in the world's going on. I'm not dressed. I got to get dressed, and I don't want to die. We've got to get out of Dodge, folks. Unbelievable. That's where we are in the second point, the reaction of the Midianites. Total confusion in the camp. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. I want you to, there's a word in there that they put in there. They ran and they cried and they fled. Okay? They cried, folks. Guess what they were? Well, these folks were scared to death on this particular occasion of what had transpired. Notice the second point of that verse there, the conflict in the camp. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. It's dark outside, isn't it? You've grabbed your sword. You don't have a torch, most likely, right? And all of a sudden, you start bumping into people. Well, guess who these people could be? This could be the enemy. But it also could be, guess who? It could be your friend. It could be your companion in battle. And folks, all of a sudden, guess what they're doing? They're killing themselves in the process. Okay? Jim, you have something? They possibly could have, easily. If they had, if they'd thrown those torches down, it would have been an experience, wouldn't it? If they had done all of that. It's unreal. Folks, the Midianites were not thinking. They were only what? They were only reacting, were they not? And that's a horrible place to be. Can you imagine the cries not only of fear, but also of pain once they started striking one another? Folks, you receive a stab wound, you get your arm chopped off, You get a hack in your back, and guess what? You don't just sit there and take it. Ooh, yeah, do another one. You know, this stuff hurts. People start crying out loud. You start hearing the moans and cries of death, do you not? And doesn't that just make everything even worse? Unbelievable. The clearing of the camp. And all the host fled to Beth-shittah in Zererath, and to the border of Abel-Meholah unto Tabbath. Man, let me ask you something. Is this what you as the offensive party wants to see? Oh, yes. Folks, they are running for their lives. Can you imagine what Israel thought? You know, if there were any doubts, if they thought, you know, that this can't be done, and all of a sudden now, guess what? The enemy is where? Folks, the enemy is on the run. The enemy is killing themselves. We're not even having to kill them. This is fantastic. Guess who's fighting for Israel? God is. And folks, isn't that what God wanted them to understand? Okay? That's what He wanted Gideon to understand. The battle belongs to who? The battle belongs, I was hoping you'd say the name of that song, but you didn't. The battle belongs to who? The Lord. There's a song that says that. Folks, every one of those towns that are mentioned, okay, Beth-shittah and Abel-Meholah, guess where they are? They are nearing the Jordan River. Okay, if you go back and you look at a map, okay, I didn't put the map back in there, of where the Midianites were located. They were located on the east side of the Jordan, just below the Dead Sea. Okay? If they're being attacked and they're being defeated, what's the one thing they want to do? Get across the river as fast as we can. Let me ask you, if you finally get across a river, does that help you in your escape? Oh, yes. Okay? And many times what happens is, if you can just get across the river, the ones that are doing pursuing, they'll come to the river's edge, and what will they do? They'll just stop. They see that they've won the battle, the enemy is leaving the land, and there's no need for us to continue to pursue these individuals. Okay, so they were doing their best to get to water as quickly as they can. Now notice point 3, the rush by the tribes of Israel. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali and out of Asher and out of all Manasseh and pursued after the Midianites. I thought that was interesting. Okay? Folks, only the initial conflict involved what? The 300 men. Okay? After that, the remaining armies that had gone home could now what? Engage in the battle. And they did engage in the battle. Okay? God only wanted Israel to know that I am fighting for you initially, right? And let me ask you this. Those 22,000 that went home, why did they go home? Because they were scared, right? That's what the Lord said. Anybody who's fearful, go home, right? So He sends all these fearful folks home. But if you are a fighting man and you see the enemy on the run, are you fearful anymore? No. Let me in on this. You know? And so now He's got all of the armies engaged in the pursuit of these particular individuals. Okay? Notice point C, we are not told how many joined in the pursuit. It was enough that the Midianites could not regroup and they could not return to the field of battle. They had to keep what? They had to keep running, folks. Unbelievable. Notice our conclusions. There's some important statements in there. What man might think could never work will work when God's hand is in it. We often think we are too small, we are too poor to really accomplish the work of God. We reason that we do not have many resources at our disposal, folks. The old saying is true, is it not? Little is much when God is in it. Deuteronomy 7 7 through 10. The Lord did not set His love upon you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any people. For ye were the fewest of all people. But because the Lord loved you, and because He would keep the oath which He had sworn unto your fathers, hath the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of the bondman, from the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord thy God, He is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love Him, and keep His commandments to 1,000 generations, and repayeth them that hate Him to their face, to destroy them. He will not be slack to him that hateth Him. He will repay him to his face. Folks, you don't want to be God's what? Enemy. You don't. I want to be God's friend, even if it's only me and God. You know that? Because God says, I will whoop the enemy. Look at point E. Let us not forget at this point that Gideon has manifested remarkable faith in the Almighty, hasn't he? He overcame his doubts, he conquered his fears, he moved with faith, he obeyed God's command, and that led to the routing of the enemy, folks. What is the victory? For this is the victory that overcometh the world, even our what? Even our faith. Folks, all we need is a little faith. And guess what? We can do unbelievable things with God on our side, can't we? That's it. I ran through that one awful fast, didn't I? You think that one's bad? The next one's only 2 verses. Whew. We're going to have to talk a lot or need a couple more baptisms. Oh. Yo.